Hello, my name is Christine and I run a vintage shop called Prima Treasures on Etsy. Today I wanted to share some tips that I use to help me sell items online a little bit more quickly and efficiently. There's nothing that's going to help you sell things instantly, but these tips should help your listing stand out and increase your odds of getting a buyer. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was photography. I feel like the photographs are very important to the process and that it's very important to make sure that your photographs are eye-catching and high quality. So you can see from my first photo that we have the object on a clean white background. It's got nice contrast to it, and the photo generally looks attractive and, let's say even professional quality. But I want to contrast that with a second photo that I'm also including. You can see the same item here, but now I've styled it with a couple of relevant products, and so that gives you a sense of what you could do with it. So styling can be helpful, although I tend to be minimalist in this regard. But the thing I want you to notice about the photograph is that we also shot it from a funky angle so that it gave the photo a little more interest, even though we didn't get too elaborate with the accessories for the photo. So my second photo that I wanted to share is a small box camera, but you can see that once again we shot it from kind of an interesting angle, so it looks a little bit more unusual than just a straight on shot, and it makes it a bit more visually appealing. So this last photo I wanted to show on a white background is actually not fully white. You can see that there's a lot of shadows here, which I think create a kind of interesting moodiness to this particular photo. And all my husband did here was he did not set his camera to completely create a white background. He allowed the shadows, and then he just used a blur tool in a photo editor to edit out the seam at the back of the wall. So this next set of photos, it has a black and white background, and we do that for items where you have a combination of a lighter portion of the object and a darker portion of the object. So having a single color background doesn't really work. For example, this dove is light on the top and dark at the bottom. So we use the two-tone background to take advantage and get better contrast in both sections of the photo. And what I want to point out specifically about these photos that we made is that it's not a complicated setup that we have. We have just a plain white melamine plank that we bought at Home Depot for less than $50. And then I'm just using like a cheap black velvet drape behind the plank. It's tacked to the wall, and that creates your black and white, and you get a nice seam at the back because the melamine plank is basically like bare shelving. So you don't really have to spend a lot of money in order to create an interesting looking backdrop for your photos. This last photo I'm including, which is on just a plain black background, I wanted to share because you can then use the drape like this without the white at the bottom. But the other reason I wanted to share this particular photo is you can see that we put a spotlight on one side and not the other, which kind of makes the figurine look more dramatic. So you can play around with lighting to get interesting effects too. Okay, so the next few photos I'm sharing are going to be dealing with the idea of styling and props. And you can see here that I've kept it pretty simple and basic. I know there are sellers out there who like to really stylize their photos, but I feel like sometimes that can detract from the item you're trying to sell or confuse the buyer about which thing in the photo is what they'll be purchasing. So in the case of what I've chosen, I pick objects that are appropriate to the item that they're planning to buy. In this case, we have a tray table, and it's got some liquor bottles on it, which would be appropriate for a tray table. And then in my next photo, we have a little lipstick holder, and the only thing I've put in there is lipstick, just again to show this is what you would do with this thing, but not anything overly elaborate. The photo is still focused on the item in question, which is the lipstick holder. So we're not detracting from the thing we want the customer to actually purchase. Now my next set of photos, I'm showing you pictures of objects that we've taken, and I'm including ones that have props, but the props are here for a reason, not just to make the products themselves look good. We're also using them, at least for me, this is a size reference. So if I'm selling liquor bottles, I like to include a wine bottle or a beer bottle to help the customer see how big is this thing. You can see in the first set of photos that the decanters were smaller than the wine bottle. And we have a second photo where the liquor bottle is much larger than the wine bottle. So this gives you a way to kind of demonstrate to customers what they'll be getting without putting measurements with people, which people can often misinterpret or just not really have a good grasp of what is 6 inches, 8 inches, whatever. And then finally, we have this photo of a small decorative piggy bank. And the other thing I like to use, which is a pen. So when you have a smaller object, using, again, a common item like a pen gives them a sense of size without them having to interpret in their head what does 4 inches mean. Okay, so my next topic I wanted to talk about was the idea of when you have multiple parts that are a part of the item that you're selling. In this case, we have a liquor set. It's got shot glasses, it's got a small bottle, it's got a holder. So I like to make sure that each product photo collection includes one picture that shows all the parts spread out so they can see exactly what parts they're getting. And so when you're selling online, sometimes parts are missing from older sets. And so having this one photo where all of the various parts are laid out and they can see exactly what parts are going to come with their purchase can be very helpful and distinguish you from other sellers. The next thing I wanted to talk about is brands. Now, if you're selling something that is a branded item, and one of the major features of the product is that it is a particular brand, you want to make sure that you include photos showing the markings to make very clear to the buyer that yes, this is the brand. Here's the mark where it says the name right on it. So anything that helps identify it as the brand you're trying to sell is very important to include a photo of that information. I can't tell you how many times I see things on eBay where they claim it's a certain brand and then they don't even show a photo so I can verify that it is that brand. So the next big topic I want to talk about is flaws. Anytime you're selling something used online, there's a likelihood that whatever it is you have may have a flaw. And it's very important for customers to know what that flaw is. So I always scrutinize my items. Sometimes you get in there with your camera phone light or a little magnifying loupe and you make sure that you don't see anything. But if you do spot something, it's very important to take a photo of that flaw and post it with the item because doing that, I know it seems counterintuitive, like, well, I don't want to show the bad angles of my object, but it builds trust. If you take 2 or 3 photos of a little scratch here or a little ding there, you're building trust with that buyer. They're more likely to assume that you've fully disclosed because you did take photos of those tiny flaws than somebody who says nothing and only uses glowing description. I'm more wary of somebody who doesn't point out any flaws whatsoever. So I'm showing several examples of photos here that are different flaws. You can see on this particular mirror, it has some spotting because it's like 100 years old. I want to make sure people know that. I don't want them angry at me after the sale is over because they found a flaw that I didn't see. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the idea of functionality. You can see here that I have a lamp. It's a decorative sculptural lamp, and I always make sure with lamps to include a photo of the lamp lit up. So that way they can see that the bulb is working, the socket is working, everything is functional, and the lamp does turn on. So you don't want to have people guess or assume if a lamp is working or not working. I'm always going to have a photo in there that tells them that. So there's no guesswork. They've seen the product in action. Anytime you can do that with a photo, I think it's a good idea to include that photo. The last thing I want to talk about is age. And I know a lot of people feel like, well, I don't know the age of something. If you're selling something that you owned, you can ballpark it. I don't think there's anything wrong with, saying, well, this was for my kids when they were 5 or 10 or whatever, and you can kind of give them a ballpark range of age based on that. Or, did you get it when you got married? Did you get it, for some particular anniversary? Anything you can remember about how long you've had it, even if it's in a range of 5 or 10 years, that's okay because it still gives them a rough idea of age. So I always encourage people, if it's something they owned or someone near them gave it to them, and they can provide any information whatsoever on age, you should include it, especially in a situation where, let's say you got it for a wedding and you only used it once or twice, or you never used it at all. That information is actually very meaningful to buyers. They like to know whether it's something that got heavy use or something that got minimal use. So if you're the person who owned it and you can tell them that kind of information, I think that always puts you ahead of someone who picks up an object from a thrift shop and does know absolutely nothing about its history. So if you know it, share it. I hope you learned something helpful today, and I appreciate you watching. Thank you.